My name is Marion Cole, and I still remember the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. For 2 weeks, my son Aaron had not answered a single call. At first, I told myself he was busy with work, but a mother knows when silence means more than just busyness. So one gray evening, I boarded a bus to Cleveland and rode in silence, staring out the window with my stomach in knots. When I reached Aaron's townhouse, the winter wind cut through my coat. I walked up the familiar steps, knocked, and called his name. No answer. I tried the knob and felt my breath catch when the door gave way. Aaron never left his door unlocked, not with his little boy Leo inside. The living room looked like a storm had torn through it. A sofa shoved out of place, a broken coffee mug and shards across the floor, dark stains seeping into the carpet. My chest tightened as I stepped over the mess, whispering for my grandson. Upstairs, room after room stood empty. Finally, in Leo's bedroom, I froze. A scraping sound, faint but steady, rolled out from beneath the bed. My hand shook on the desk. I wanted to kneel, but my legs would not move. Instead, I whispered his name, voice breaking, and backed away to dial the police with trembling fingers. Red and blue lights washed across the front windows as 2 officers hurried inside. I led them upstairs, every step heavier than the last. My voice was barely a whisper as I pointed to Leo's bed. The younger officer crouched low, speaking firmly into the silence, asking if anyone was under there. No reply came. Then, with one sharp motion, they lifted the frame. Leo lay curled into himself, thin as a shadow. His hair was matted, his cheeks hollow, and in his small hands he clutched an empty plastic bottle as if it were his only lifeline. His wide eyes stared past us, vacant, unblinking. For a moment, no one moved. The officers froze. I froze. The whole world seemed to stop. I wanted to gather him into my arms, but my hands shook so badly I was afraid to touch him. One officer gently lifted him, and I stumbled behind as they carried him out into the bitter night. The siren wailed as we sped through the city streets toward the hospital. I sat beside my grandson in the back seat, fanning his face with a scrap of paper, whispering through tears. "Grandma is here, Leo. You are safe now. My name is Marion Cole, and I am 61 years old. I live in a modest town just outside Cleveland, where the days pass quietly, and the neighbors still wave when you drive by. For most of my life I worked as a librarian, the kind of job that rewards patience and a love of small details. Since my husband passed away, my son Aaron and my grandson Leo have been my closest family. Aaron called me at least once every week. Sometimes it was just a quick update about his job. Other times it was about Leo's school projects or the latest Lego set they were building together. No matter how busy life became, he always made time for those calls. That steady rhythm was our thread of connection, and I never took it for granted. So when the phone stayed silent for days, then weeks, I knew in my bones something was wrong. I tried to quiet my fears by telling myself he was busy. But a mother knows the difference. That is why I packed a bag, boarded a bus, and traveled the miles to his home unannounced. I had no idea that decision would uncover the darkest chapter of my life. The silence began as a faint worry, the kind you brush aside while making morning coffee. I called Aaron at the usual time, letting the phone ring until his voicemail clicked on. I left a simple message. "Son, are you doing all right? Call me when you can." Hours turned into days, and the message remained unheard. I tried again at dawn, at lunchtime, even late at night. Each time the same result, no answer. I sent short texts, words I hoped would draw him back. "I miss you. Please check in." Not one was delivered. I called his office and spoke with a coworker who hesitated before admitting, "I haven't seen Aaron all week." Another friend said he thought Aaron might be on vacation. Their voices carried more confusion than certainty, and my heart sank deeper. By the 10th day, I was desperate. I reached out to neighbors near his townhouse. One older woman mentioned a stormy night when a light flickered on and off inside Aaron's home. She assumed it was Leo heading to bed, but even as she spoke, her voice trembled. That trembling echoed the fear already burning in my chest. At the hospital, the emergency team rushed Leo into a brightly lit room, their voices calm but urgent. I stood at the doorway, clutching my coat, afraid to breathe. They checked his pulse, placed an IV into his fragile arm, and whispered about dehydration and weight loss. Words like severe malnutrition and psychological trauma floated in the air, each one cutting deeper into me. When the doctor finally let me near him, I saw my grandson's eyes still wide open, but fixed on some faraway place. I stroked his hand, whispering his name again and again, but he gave no sign. He heard me. He held tightly to that empty bottle, the plastic crinkling under his grip, as though it were the only anchor left in his world. That night, I stayed beside his bed, listening to the soft beeping of machines and the uneven rhythm of his breathing. Nurses offered blankets and gentle words, but nothing reached the boy I once knew, the boy who used to laugh and chatter without end. I hummed an old lullaby I once sang to Aaron, hoping some part of Leo might remember. Still, he lays silent, locked in a place I could not reach, and my heart broke with every minute that passed. On the third evening at the hospital, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized from the precinct. My hands shook as I answered. Mrs. Cole, the detective, began, his voice grave. "We re-examined your son's house using luminol. It revealed a significant amount of blood in the living room." I felt the words echo inside my chest, dull and heavy blood. My lips tried to form a reply, but nothing came out. The detective paused, then added, "We are treating this as a possible homicide. My knees weakened and I nearly dropped the phone." At that moment, Leo stirred his small hand, tugging at my sleeve. His wide eyes filled with tears, as if he had heard every word. And then, after days of silence, he broke down. "Dad, he's gone," he cried, his voice raw and trembling. The sound pierced through the sterile hospital room like a blade. I pulled him into my arms, rocking him gently as nurses hurried in. Startled by his cries, I whispered, "No, Leo, it is not certain yet." But my own voice cracked with doubt. The detective's voice still echoed in my ear, steady but heavy. "We will need you to provide a statement, Mrs. Cole." I clutched Leo tighter, unable to let go. For the first time since I walked into that unlocked house, I realized the nightmare might be even darker than I feared. Long before that stormy night, there were signs of cracks forming in Aaron's marriage. I remember the first time he brought Sabrina home. She was bright, eager, and a little shy. She blushed when I asked about her cooking, laughed nervously when she tried to help me with the dishes. Back then, I believed she would love my son for the rest of his life. For a while, it seemed true. They married, and when Leo was born, the whole family felt wrapped in new light. But slowly, things changed. Sabrina developed a habit of gambling. At first it was just small bets, the kind she brushed off with a smile. Then came larger debts, phone calls at odd hours, and collectors knocking on their door. Aaron tried to cover for her. He sold the car he had saved for the one he was so proud of, and handed over the money to keep trouble away. He came to me once, his eyes red, asking for help. I gave him my savings, telling myself it was only this one time. The shouting grew more frequent. I visited once and saw Leo pressed into a corner, tears running down his cheeks, while Sabrina scolded him for spilling milk. Aaron stood nearby, helpless. It was then I realized he was drowning in a storm of his own. When the divorce finally came, I thought relief would follow. Aaron won custody, and for a short time peace returned. But peace never lasts when old debts remain unpaid. The room was quiet, except for the hum of medical machines when the detective asked Leo if he could share what he remembered. I held his hand, assuring him he was safe. After a long silence, his small voice finally broke through. "It was raining hard that night," he whispered, eyes locked on the blanket clutched to his chest. I was building a Lego tower when the doorbell rang. It rang again and again. Dad went to the door and looked through the peephole. His face looked different, tight and worried. He turned to me and said, "Leo, get under your bed and do not come out until I say." I didn't understand, but he pushed me toward my room, pulled the comforter down low, and told me to stay quiet. Through a narrow gap, I saw everything. Mom came in with a tall man I didn't know. She asked Dad where I was. He told her calmly I was with Grandma for winter break. She started yelling. She said he owed money, and if he didn't pay, there would be trouble. Dad shook his head. He said she had already taken too much from him. The tall man stepped closer and shoved him. Dad stumbled but kept standing. Then came another shove, harder. I heard a crack as Dad's head hit the corner of the table. He fell and didn't move. Leo trembled as the words spilled out, his small fingers digging into my sleeve. I wanted to call him to reach him, but I was too scared. I stayed hidden, listening to their voices fade, and then the sound of something heavy being dragged. Tears streamed down his face. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, Dad would wake up, but he never did. The next morning, the detectives asked me to come to the precinct. In a small room with a map spread across the table, they showed me grainy security footage from a neighbor's camera. The video was shaky, the storm blurring the picture, but one detail stood clear. A dark pickup truck parked outside Aaron's townhouse on the night Leo described. Minutes later, the same truck pulled away, something long and heavy covered with a tarp in the back. The detective explained that the license plate was unreadable, but the truck model matched vehicles often used by local loan collectors. My stomach tightened. I could almost hear the sound Leo described, the dragging, the muffled voices. It all began to fit together in a way I desperately wished it wouldn't. That same day, a neighbor came forward. Mrs. Carson, an elderly woman across the street, admitted she had heard shouting and the crash of furniture during the storm, but was too afraid to call the police. As she spoke, guilt trembled in her voice. I squeezed her hand and told her she was brave for speaking. Now her testimony combined with the footage gave investigators their first solid trail. For me, it was both hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Back at the hospital, while Leo rested, a memory surfaced that made my heart pound. Years earlier, Aaron had proudly shown me a folder. Inside was a life insurance policy he had taken out soon after Leo was born. He had said with that bright smile of his, "Mom, I want to make sure my family is secure no matter what." At the time, it touched me deeply. I never thought that decision could later become a weapon. I told the detectives about it, and they returned to Aaron's townhouse to search his study. Hours later, they handed me a copy of the very same policy. My breath caught as I read the lines. The sole beneficiary was Sabrina. After the divorce, Aaron never changed the document. Out of love and responsibility, he had unknowingly left an open door for her. The detective explained quietly that if Aaron were declared dead, Sabrina would inherit a large sum, more than enough to pay debts and walk away free. I sat back in the chair, staring at the paper, until the letters blurred through my tears. Aaron had thought he was protecting his family, and instead, he may have placed a target on his own back. 2 days later, the detective called again, his tone heavy. "Miss Cole, we discovered an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, often used by loan collectors. We need you to come with us." My knees weakened as I agreed, leaving Leo in the care of a nurse he trusted. The drive felt endless, every passing mile pulling me closer to a truth I was not ready to face. Inside the warehouse, the air was bitter cold, heavy with the smell of rust and chemicals. Officers led me to a separate building, the county morgue. There, under fluorescent lights, a white sheet lay across a gurney. When they pulled it back, my son's face appeared pale and still, his thick brows, the line of his jaw features I had kissed since his childhood, were unmistakable. I collapsed, whispering, "My son," over and over, my tears soaking the sleeve of my coat. The medical examiner spoke gently, explaining Aaron had died from a traumatic head injury on the very night of the storm. I barely heard his words. All I could see was the boy I raised the man he became lying silent before me. A piece of my heart was gone forever. Not long after the identification, the police tracked down the man who had been seen with Sabrina on the night of the storm. He was rough-looking, with a scar down his cheek and a worn leather jacket. At first he denied everything, claiming he hardly knew her. But when detectives laid the evidence in front of him, the blanket stained with Aaron's blood, the jacket belonging to Sabrina, his bravado crumbled. Faced with the possibility of a long sentence, he confessed. He admitted to helping Sabrina move Aaron's body from the townhouse to the truck. He described how she promised him money once the insurance came through. Finally, under pressure, he revealed where she was hiding, an abandoned house on the edge of the city, far from the main roads. I listened to the report from outside the interrogation room, clutching my shawl so tightly my knuckles turned white. The man's words confirmed what my heart had feared since the beginning. Sabrina had not only returned, she had orchestrated everything. And now, with her location known, there was no place left for her to run. The trial drew people from across the city. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing as Sabrina was led inside in handcuffs. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, holding Leo's small hand. His fingers trembled in mine, and I whispered, "We are here for your father. We will be strong together." The prosecutor began by laying out the timeline. He presented photographs of the living room marked with blood patterns, the blanket stained with Aaron's DNA, and the jacket belonging to Sabrina. He played the blurry video of the pickup truck idling in front of the townhouse on the stormy night. And then he introduced Leo's recorded testimony. The sound of my grandson's fragile voice filled the courtroom, describing how his father hid him under the bed, how Sabrina and the tall man entered, and how Aaron fell after the shove. Many in the audience wiped away tears. Sabrina tried to hold her composure, but as the evidence stacked higher, her mask cracked. She suddenly stood and shouted, "I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted the money." The room fell silent. Her accomplice sitting beside his attorney shot back. "You planned everything. You told me to push him." The judge struck the gavel to quiet the chaos. But the damage was done. Everyone could see the truth unraveling. Sabrina's greed and desperation had driven her to destroy the very family she once claimed to love. After days of testimony, the judge returned with the verdict. The courtroom grew silent as her clear voice filled the air. The defendant, Sabrina Ward, is found guilty of first-degree murder and insurance fraud. She is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her accomplice is found guilty of accessory to murder and concealment of evidence, and is sentenced to 20 years in prison. The sound of the gavel echoed, and for a moment I could not breathe. My son would never come back, but justice had spoken. I looked down at Leo. He hid his face against my arm, shoulders shaking. I pulled him close, whispering that it was over, that his father could finally rest. My tears fell freely, not only for the loss, but for the long fight that had finally reached its end. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but I had nothing more to give. I held Leo's hand and walked away, each step heavy yet carrying a small measure of relief. The storm that had torn through our family left scars that would never fade, but at least the truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. In the weeks after the trial, I closed the door of Aaron's townhouse for the last time. I could not bear the silence of those rooms. Instead, I brought Leo home with me to my small town where neighbors know each other's names and the nights are quiet. It was not easy. He carried nightmares in his sleep and fear in his waking hours. But together, step by step, we began to rebuild. I enrolled him in therapy, where a gentle counselor taught him to use drawings and stories to release what words could not yet carry. At home, I made simple routines, a chart on the fridge for meals and water, the same bedtime each night, the same phrase every morning, "Grandma is here." "You are safe." Little by little he began to trust those patterns. I know the pain will never fully disappear, but I also know love can stitch together even the deepest wounds. If this story has touched you, share it. Comment where you are listening from, and remember to hold close the people you love today.